morning. Thank you all for coming on such a beautiful day to the Museum of Contemporary Art for our Art of Engagement Symposium. I'm Elaine Lally. I'm one of the chief investigators for the Art of Engagement research project, and I'd like first of all to introduce Elizabeth Ann Macgregor, Director of the MCA, who is going to give our welcome and introductory presentation.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet upon, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and a very special welcome in particular to our overseas guests, to, of course, wonderful Sydney in all its glory. And you will have a bit of time to appreciate the fabulous views here at coffee time. I just want to start by giving a little bit of context to this C3 West project that some of you in this room will know more about than others. And to do that, I think I have to give you a little bit about my history in relationship to this topic of engagement. I realised to my horror a couple of weeks ago that it was about 20 years ago that I became Director of the Ikon Gallery in Birmingham. It's a pretty scary thought. But it was a very interesting time politically in the UK. Thatcherism was, of course, in full swing, although it was close to the end of the days of the lady herself. But the impact of the policies of Thatcherism on the arts had been very profound. Attacks on elitism, attacks on the political bias of the arts were monotonously regular. And all the arts organisations who were supported by the Arts Council of Great Britain, as it then was, were forced to think very carefully about what they were doing. The old Keynesian assumption that the arts were good for you, an essential part of a liberal education, was well and truly under attack. John Maynard Keynes was, of course, the first chairman of the Arts Council of Great Britain. Interesting now in the context of the current level of interest in Keynesian ideas again on the economy. Maybe we should remind our politicians of his views on the arts too. In the UK, theatres, galleries and orchestras all had to prove that they were in fact viable businesses and relevant to the so-called man on the street, something of a mantra in the tabloid press, used to attack all kinds of arts, but in particular, of course, contemporary art and the much derided Turner Prize, which greeted every year with great glee by the tabloid media. While ideologically problematic, this change in the climate towards the arts forced many organisations to really examine what they were doing and, more importantly, for whom they were doing it, which led to an interesting range of responses, from the downright cynicism to genuine attempts to move beyond the rhetoric and consider genuinely how to engage with new audiences. Didn't take me long to get to that engage word. One positive outcome of all this was that every gallery in the UK, no matter how small, set up education programmes. These offered a whole range of opportunities to young people, which I believe had a fundamental effect on the way that the contemporary visual arts developed in the UK. But it was not just the right wing that revelled in attacking the arts. Many local councils were left-wing, supposedly, and when the Arts Council changed its policy towards supporting contemporary galleries and requested that local councils pick up half the tab, chaos ensued. Councils were not prepared to cooperate, and again, elitism was the tag from the left. The fate of many contemporary galleries hung in the balance. And this was the atmosphere when I moved to Birmingham to take on the directorship of one of them. Fortunately, in Birmingham, the case for the role of the arts in urban regeneration had begun to be articulated and to have some credence with councillors, which eventually led to the building of the magnificent new home for the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, elite disguised as conference centre. But contemporary art was still regarded with deep suspicion. We set out to address two misperceptions in particular. First of all, that contemporary art only appeals to a very small number of people. And secondly, that artists are strange individuals who spend their days in their studio waiting to be plucked from obscurity by a discerning curator or critic, a stereotype that was well out of date, as many artists sought new ways to make their work and indeed create direct avenues to reach audiences themselves without necessarily going through the gallery system. What we did in Birmingham was to bring artists into direct contact with communities, Not so unusual, you might say, given the strong tradition of community arts, which had grown up in opposition to the so-called high arts during the 60s and 70s. But our starting point was different. It began with the skills of professional artists, and our challenge was to demonstrate how these skills could be employed in making work outside the traditional exhibition format, while not ignoring the importance of this too. Indeed, it was bringing artists who'd made work for galleries into this wider arena that was interesting to me. We wanted to show how contemporary art could and should be relevant to many more people than those who traditionally visited galleries. In other words, to engage new audiences with the work of contemporary artists. We ran a whole range of projects with varying degrees of success. The gallery closed for 9 months during a relocation to new premises, and this is when our focus on working in the community really began to show some results. For me, the most important point was when, after the renovation, the night of the reopening, it was the people from those community groups who were queuing up on the doorstep to visit a gallery, many for the first time in their lives. And all of them said it was because of their involvement with artists. This was a very proud moment for all of us, to demonstrate that you actually could engage with the work of living artists and bring people who hitherto had not engaged with it into the gallery context. Making the gallery a key part of our local community was such an important step. Unlike the ideology of community arts, which is always based within the own community and has its own set of prejudices about how communities will respond to art, we put the gallery, the institution, at the heart of what we did. The process of demystifying the artist was crucial to making the arts a central part of city life and not an add-on luxury. I don't think I need to say more to this audience about why this matters, though it may be that the role of the mainstream gallery, or in this case the museum, needs to be further articulated. I believe the museum is a resource for the wider community. The gallery is a constant presence, something that can form links to communities with people from all walks of life, so they can be totally comfortable in visiting it. No sense of, that's not for me. Rather than changing programming to reflect what people supposedly want, which was the knee-jerk reaction of the Arts Council of Great Britain under the Thatcherite attacks, in Birmingham we set out to create a space where the ideas of artists could be explored in a comfortable and non-intimidating atmosphere, encouraging visitors to embrace the new, to see things differently. All projects working with community groups have a finite time span. No gallery can keep outreach projects going ad infinitum. The gallery is what provides the constant, the place where we can bring people, the place where we can alleviate that old parachute syndrome where arts groups drop in for a period and then exit, often leaving communities feeling used and experimented on. The gallery can be at the centre of a network of connections, reaching out to people and bringing them in, building bridges between artists and people. One of the reasons that we were able to do these projects, I believe, was a shift in artistic thinking. But I do think that a lot of what has been presented as new modes of working or practice is simply a new form of elitism that does little to address the core question of what we mean by collaboration between artists and people. Using people as fodder for artwork is not, in my view, a particularly productive form of making work, but I will leave this as an aside for now. When I came to Sydney, I was curious that some aspects of these debates did not seem to have taken place. Community arts, or I think there's a different terminology here, community cultural something or other, and the mainstream arts organisations were still operating in very different spheres. A chance meeting in Brisbane with Jock McQueenie at a conference when I was presenting some of the projects in Birmingham started me thinking about what the MCA could do. I was particularly interested in Jock's ideas about the role of the commercial sector, and C3 West was born, Community, Commerce and Culture, or more specifically, Contemporary Art. We commissioned Jock to do a feasibility study into what kind of projects involving artists and business partners and communities in Western Sydney we could do. And in the course of his initial research, Jock met with John Kirkman of Penrith Regional Gallery and Con Guriotis of Kazula Powerhouse and so the cultural partnership for C3 West was born. It's been a long, slow, but ultimately highly rewarding process, and you'll hear more about the projects from participants today. What I would like to see coming out of this project is ways in which we can move the debate on in this country, to take a leading role in working with artists to generate new ideas about how to navigate the world in which we live, drawing on the creativity of artists to help us face the challenges of today. To do this, we need to demonstrate what it is that these artists contribute to society in ways that are direct and free of jargon. We can all spout high-minded aspirations about what we think the arts can do for people. More importantly, we need to be able to point to concrete examples of ways in which artists articulate the issues and collaborate with a whole range of community partners, and that includes the corporate sector. For me, this is the ultimate agenda, to be able to show to those who do not believe us that the arts are indeed critical to society, that the arts, and in particular the contemporary visual arts, are not some optional extra that can be taken or left as the fancy takes us. We need to underpin our assertions with very real examples of where artists make a real difference to people's lives, individually or collectively. I like to think that C3 West, and indeed other projects that we do at the MCA, do that. And today we're here to present them within a wider context and to hear from some of our international colleagues about other role models. You'll hear a range of presentations today, and it seems to me highly appropriate that the forum is actually taking place at the MCA. We are, after all, Australia's major contemporary art venue, and we do put the artist at the heart of all we do. There is still much to do, and I believe we have a critical political agenda to address here. In 1997, 2 years before I left for Australia, the Labour Party swept to power, and the arts community heaved a huge sigh of relief, and with some justification, as Tony Blair pinned his colours to the mast of Cool Britannia, doubled the Arts Council's budget, and set the arts organisations on a new trajectory, resulting, of course, in something that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the new agenda of social inclusion, with the arts playing a critical role, a policy that has had some extraordinary outcomes and a somewhat mixed response from aspects of the arts community. What is perhaps not so well known is that this Labour flag waving for culture was actually a direct result of Australia. In 1994, Tony Blair visited Australia as leader of the opposition, and under the influence of a certain Paul Keating, who had recently launched his national strategy for the arts, the Creative Nation, came back and asked his co-workers to develop a cultural policy for the UK. Who would have thought that Australia was responsible for this extraordinary change in thinking in Britain? Whatever happened to us? We need now to address the current political indifference to the arts and find ways to re-engage with our politicians to show them what it is that the arts are doing and can do in this country. I think the old myths that Australians are only interested in sport need to be dispelled, not by making it an either-or, but by showing that we can support both, which is why I'm particularly proud of our partnership with the Penrith Panthers. When I first came here, I was told that Sydney would never embrace a museum of contemporary art. Sydney-siders are too preoccupied with going to the beach and talking about real estate. Indeed, I had this very discussion with some friends last night. I was very surprised to hear that old one being trotted out again. This week, we were named Sydney's favourite museum for the second year running. Our attendances have increased fivefold and continue to rise. There's an extraordinary number of young people coming here, and we cannot cope with the number of education groups that want to work with our fabulous team here. I simply don't believe that Australians don't want artists to be supported and recognised, but I do think we have a big challenge in getting our message through at the higher levels of society. Hopefully, as the impending doom and gloom around the financial crisis recedes, we may find the space to talk again about the importance of the arts. I hope you enjoyed today's session and that it provokes further debate and indeed action. Perhaps what we need is an Australian national campaign for the arts. I leave you with that thought. Thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy the session. Thank you.